Hello, this is part 10 of my notice to the Universal Postal Union, and we've got to the stage where we're talking about what we need the Universal Postal Union to do, having found that we could evoke the authority to deal with all the lack of remedy, lack of response that we got from all those indemnified bodies in Switzerland like United Nations and World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. Could you structure the mea culpa to explicitly counter diplomatic immunity law, fraudulent taxation, and the Kestrel Act? These three things would mean that the UPU's explanation could then be used as a precedent by the people. So again, we're talking about the mea culpa, which is a self-blame decree. It's like, okay, what we're going to explain is that we at the Universal Postal Union had been helping this be perpetuated. We also had a hand in perpetuating the diplomatic immunity of all these organisations, and we're not going to do that anymore. And also, we're going to hold everybody else to account. So, and that's if it's in writing, delivered to everybody, which is within their capability, their universal service obligation, then we could use that paperwork, universal paperwork, to correct our status to living men and women, a superior jurisdiction to corporations and governments and banks and military. Now, so we want that paperwork to reaffirm our standing and jurisdiction. The justification for the redirection of the Universal Service Obligation funds in 2023 was for essential infrastructure network affording universal access to new telecommunications technologies. This was millions, hundreds of millions, I think, and that justification is a lie. Just like calling the 5G rollout during the lockdown an essential service in other countries. All it was to give the installers the privilege of complete freedom of movement, right to cut down trees for its low range frequency, and it gave the mystery owners of the 5G technology complete indemnity for the consequences to the people living in the area of installing it, and no national safety tests or research were conducted. It's a military technology. And in England, all the safety, the people who've conducted the safety studies, they were dissolved like 10, 15 years ago. And the councils say nothing, just say, go ahead. The main lie from the point of view of the UPU is the implication that the technology is installed for us, the people, and that we are granted access to something. The UPU boasted 2.12 LAKHS connected through Baranet and 7,460 mobile towers installed. Now we all know how dangerous those are. And totally unnecessary. 8 islands, all those mobile towers only installed for 8 islands are now connected under Shanghai ANN project. I mean, does this mean anything to anybody? No. This is clearly part of some other project that has absolutely nothing to do with getting 8 islands of the how many thousands of islands up to speed with a digital connection. 4G saturation project, 24,000 uncovered villages in rural and remote areas at a cost of 26.3, anyway, a massive amount of money. The reality is that the network grants the technology access to us. We're not granted access to anything. It's granted access to us for whatever hostile military purposes they have in mind. The so-called infrastructure must be dismantled, and universal service obligation funds must be focused on opening post offices, postal service, and real three-dimensional logistics, not 4.0 digital nothingness. Or is the broadband USO something different? I just didn't see any money designated for the UPU's proper universal service obligation. What funds exactly have been directed to postal services in each area? How does the UPU support the different physical needs of an area? Whatever broadband does, it does not lead to a rapid socio-economic development with improved standard of living on any front. The Universal Postal Union has been used as a way for maritime law to come onto the land. It has been a subtle and discreet encroachment into territories once governed by sovereign or constitutional equity law. It has happened over time. To facilitate this, local production of food, growth of supply networks, manufacture and distribution of food and goods has been refused financial support, and it always been got rid of, specifically so that everything must be imported into the country. As any parcel comes across the sea, it starts to involve maritime law. It was agreed when the UPU was formulated by treaty that no nation can be recognised as a nation without being in international admiralty in order to have a form common to all nations for engaging commerce and resolving disputes. Thank you for resolving this huge dispute concerning commerce. It's huge. Almost a quarter century ago, New Zealand gave its post office a banking licence and created Kiwi Bank to compete with the corporate profit maximising banks. It has been very successful in quelling corporate greed and now has over 20% of New Zealand's banking market. While we have needed this sort of competition for private banks like the public banks of Germany, we have also needed private banks held accountable for their actions. Instead, successive governments have given everything of value away. They've decimated the post office networks, halving the number of outlets, but way more than halving. 35 years ago, there was about 20,000 in Britain, 20,000 in Ireland. Now there's under 1,000. And the number is still falling, turning the post office into an agency bank and postmasters into slave labour for the pillar banks. The remedy for this case. Autographing my stamps established me as the postmaster of the contract and constituted a cross-claim as well. Using the stamps process on the court documents presented a problem for the appeal court as their jurisdiction is subordinate to the UPU, which I had invoked. The recipients of the documents with autographed stamps actually backed off. Thankfully, when the court didn't provide me with the remedy I sought, I've been able to set about bringing this to the UPU to clean up. I have heard that Chinese, Japanese, American and British stamps are the most effective. It is just luck that I am in England at the moment. But I hope this isn't another area of privilege where one member of the union has more power than another. 88% of foundation donations to the World Health Organization come from Bill Gates, which violates every competitor's law in Europe and the USA. I have mainly left the cases of violent crime and violations of international law and the Nuremberg principles to the appeal attached. However, the history of the World Health Organization does demonstrate how the Switzerland-based organizations set themselves up with diplomatic protection specifically with the intention of doing harm. The World Health Organization knew they were going to commit crimes because their first Director General was no other than General Sands, in the hospitality of the Germans in Dachau in 1940. In 1947, he was nominated by the Rockefeller Foundation to become the first Director General of the WHO, advocating for population control as its primary objective. This is the advancement of the same genocidal program that started with philanthropic Carnegie funding of a eugenics office, Cold Spring Labs, in 1913. It was set up to decide who lives, who dies, and who gets any sort of a life. A small number of criminal and industrial players decided to subordinate the whole population. In 1937, they set in motion their own law to protect themselves, permanent and absolute immunity from every sort of personal prosecution and detention, and from legal prosecution of every kind, even investigation for prosecution. But I still have a feeling they were not allowed to murder, and the UPU should be able to find this overarching law to stop them. Then there is the 88% controlling interest in the organisation. This is not an independent, charitably funded donation. Under tax laws on both sides of the Atlantic, they can constitute directed donations which are specifically forbidden, even in the UN Charter or World Health Organization's constitution. It is a tax crime, a racketeering crime, a money laundering crime, and racketeering leading to murder. There are more than sufficient grounds to draw this systemic war against humanity to a close. Following a global investigation into microbiology, medicine, law, and economics, ending in the prosecution of one of the largest financial frauds, it came into stark relief that United Nations have lied to us for 110 years. A small number of criminal, industrial players decided to subordinate the whole population to enrich themselves by impoverishing and killing the population. As examples, funding was given during a moratorium on dual-use research for an indefinite term and unlimited amount. It was given by Anthony from the Fauci family in 2014 to look at novel functions of virus pathogenesis in vivo, which means in living systems. The research was supposed to only look at clinical simulations and models. Also in 2014, the bird flu virus was given the gain of function to affect and transmit between mammals so that humans can be infected, which they are now. The United States Department of Defense worked on a military countermeasure between 2000 and 2019 with funding